going to get started. Thank you for that. You ready, BevCam? Okay. All right. Thank you all for joining me tonight for another, some of you may have been at the design standards meetings, kind of another informal meeting to introduce the concept of accessory dwelling units again to some of you and for the first time to some others, and talk about what the administration is planning in terms of putting forth a proposed ordinance to update and expand our accessory dwelling unit ordinance. So for tonight, I'll go a little bit into what the background of this project is, describe ADUs, define them, and then also describe how we are intending to interpret them and apply them into the city, and what the benefits we believe to be are, and then have a segment for public comment and questions. Not really much for wrap up and next steps. I'll do that before we jump into the questions. The QR codes that you see around are an opportunity for you to scan if you have a smartphone. You can scan and provide public comment there. It's also an option if you just want to say, yes, I support, no, I don't support. And I will try and get that up. I've been trying to get that up on our website, but I'll try and get that up there tomorrow. But in the meantime, anybody can do that, and we'll leave that open for the next few weeks. There's also a comment box. If you don't want to speak in public, don't have a smartphone and don't feel comfortable with technology, there's some index cards. You can write a comment on there, or you can email it to me at dwynne@beverlyma.gov. I also answer the phone, 978-605-2341. All that information is on the Planning Department website. I am Darlene Wynn. I'm the Planning Director. I did not introduce myself. So thank you all for being here. So a little bit about the project background. This idea of adopting and updating our accessory dwelling unit ordinance was first proposed in our 2016, or at least to my knowledge, our 2016 community housing plan, and then also as an action item identified in our 2020 community master plan or comprehensive master plan. In addition to that, one of the sub-action items in the master plan was to actually have a community engagement process around accessory dwelling units. And we did that with Metropolitan Area Planning Council between 2021 and 2022. It was a year-long project where they were our consultant and led the process to help run community engagement with a couple of public forums, some focus groups, some research, and they ultimately drafted this original ordinance. They also created this data-driven tool that was a unique approach to looking at a zoning ordinance, so taking the different factors that we were considering and then basically coming up, which I'll show you later, with an estimate of how many parcels could actually take advantage of the ADU ordinance under the requirements that we have included. Can I focus it? I cannot. I don't know how to do that with this. Let me see. Also, since I didn't mention it, we did have a community steering committee. A number of those people are here. Sarah Bartley from the Planning Board, I saw. Rosa Ordaz from Harbor Light Homes. Is there anyone else? Because we did this online, and so some people I didn't actually meet in person. And I also noticed a couple of city councilors here. Councilor St. Hilaire, Councilor Sweeney, Councilor Rotundo, Councilor Bowen. Did I miss anybody? A couple of planning board members. Thank you all for being here. I don't, I'm sorry, it may be the font, but I'll try to say everything that's on the slides anyway. So to start, what is an ADU? Accessory dwelling unit, ADU, is a secondary dwelling unit within the same lot as a larger primary dwelling unit. And they can come in many different forms. They can be detached, like a separate cottage house. They can be detached above a garage that exists or could be new. They can be attached in many different forms, in a basement, in an attic, above an attached garage, or perhaps replacing a garage. There's a couple of real-life examples, not from Beverly, although there are many similar in Beverly, because we currently do have an accessory, we have an in-law apartment ordinance, which allows people to live in an accessory dwelling unit, but only if they are related. So family, but family does include things that are non-blood relatives. So just simplify that. But we do have it right now, but it's limited to what I would call a familial relationship. And the benefits of ADUs, as derived from a significant amount of research and the process around this project and the master plan, they tend to be more naturally affordable to live in. They're a less costly option for middle-income households. They are smaller generally, as they're required to be smaller than the principal use on the lot. So they're suitable for smaller families, young adults, empty nesters. Our household size nationally is declining, so this is more suitable for this type. So there's the average household size is more like 2.3 people per household versus in 1970 it was 3.1 or 3.2. So this is a more suitable housing type. It allows seniors to age in place and stay in the community. Allows people who work in Beverly to live in Beverly, particularly teachers, public safety, nurses, retail workers. I could go on and on about the people who are struggling currently to find housing within their community. ADUs have a lower impact on the environment and the neighborhood. They are typically not developing open space. There's no large construction projects. The infrastructure is already servicing the lot in terms of water and sewer connections, utility connections. It's a gentle density, so designed and maintained by homeowners. They obviously have an interest in keeping their property looking well and desirable, so, and they probably have relationships with their neighbors, so they're trying to minimize any impacts with their neighbors. And infill development generally promotes a more walkable, car-light neighborhood. And then finally, as I mentioned, it provides more options for homeowners and homeownership. You can downsize somebody who owns an empty nester who's living in a large single-family house could downsize into the ADU unit and rent out the larger unit, or vice versa. It could allow somebody as an empty nester to stay in their home because they might not have another alternative if they sell their house. It could also allow caretaker, children, or parents. Note those things are all allowed now. Well, parents and children are allowed now. Well, you can put there.
That's what you get for complaining about the farms.
I know. Let me see. It's been on for a while, so I might have got tired. Keep going. And finally, the homeowner can rent the ADU to gain an extra source of income. So that also allows them to stay in the home longer. So the need for housing, as I said, since it's really small now, I'm just going to read everything for you. So as I said before, household size is decreasing. It's a national trend, but it also drives the need to create more housing units to meet the demand of a growing population. As an example, in Beverly, both nationally and in Beverly, housing creation from 1990 to 2020 has not kept up with the demand or the rising population. In Beverly, between 1960 and 1990, we built 4,814 housing units, and between 1990 and 2020, we built 1,927 housing units. And the population is larger now and in more households because the households are smaller. So that helps to contribute to rising housing costs. More than 2/3 of new housing units built recently have been built around the downtown. This is a solution that would allow encourage housing units to be built outside of that area. Housing costs for both ownership and existing rentals have risen sharply and are unaffordable for many people, and particularly impacts those on fixed incomes or just starting out in the housing market. Finally, a lack of suitable housing for the workforce puts local economy at risk, drives up homelessness, and increases cost burdens on homeowners and renters. So the intent of ADUs in Beverly was to create feasible alternatives for the aging population, empty nesters, seniors looking to stay in Beverly, to encourage a diverse population of residents in Beverly by providing additional affordable housing options, to enable homeowners of single-family dwellings to generate rental income on their properties while still occupying a principal dwelling, and creating additional housing units in a low impact and sustainable manner. As I mentioned before, accessory apartments exist currently in Beverly's ordinance. They have to be attached or within the primary home. They are for family only. They are a maximum of 900 square feet, 2 bedrooms, 2 occupants. They require 2 parking spaces per unit, or 1 if they're in the depot overlay district. Special permit is required, and they're restricted, as it said, to family members or caretakers. And then if that person leaves, allegedly, you're supposed to tear out your kitchen. So this doesn't really happen very often, but that is, you know, a very difficult to enforce piece of the existing ordinance. So there were a bunch of key decisions as we thought about this process. As we went through this year-long process. So thinking about what an ADU ordinance should look like in Beverly. So where in Beverly are they allowed? What types of ADUs are allowed in those locations? What are the design and parking requirements? How are ADUs permitted? And then under people, are there restrictions on who is allowed to live in an ADU? How many bedrooms and occupants are allowed per ADU? How many ADUs are allowed in total? Don't share too loud. To sell. And then should the units be restricted for affordability? So those are the kind of decision point factors that the steering committee considered and thought about as we went through this process. So where would ADUs be allowed? Our conclusions were that ADUs should be allowed by right, which is a change from the existing ordinance, in most residential zoning districts, particularly all the low single-family density zoning districts, R6 through R90, and then RMD. And then high-density districts or special districts would require special permits. So that's the RHD and the RSD. This is a map, hard to read, but the green is essentially where they'd be allowed by right. There's a couple darker blue areas, particularly between Cabot and Rantoul, and up in Folly Hill, Trask Lane area where they'd be allowed by special permit. And the gray are non-residential areas. It does include the CC district downtown, where they would not be allowed. So the outcome of the tech tool, the data-driven model that MAPC had created for us, was determined that there's about 13,500 parcels in the city of Beverly, total parcels. So of those parcels, 7,644 could potentially, feasibly, in an extreme situation, have an ADU. And then of those, it's kind of broken down. So 2,445 could have convert an attached unit. 7,570, so almost all of them could attach a new unit. 553 could build an ADU in a detached existing accessory unit building, and 4,617 parcels could have a detached new accessory building. I don't expect you to see these maps. I've got 5 maps that show them in all those areas, but they're very hard to read even in person. So they're just there for visual interest. And I'll get back a little bit to that later in terms of the market uptake and what we actually expect to happen. We don't expect anything near that amount of accessory dwelling units to be built in the city. So for our proposed regulations, for all accessory apartments, we would define it as a self-contained apartment or unit with its own sleeping, cooking, and sanitary facilities in an owner-occupied single-family home or lot that is either attached to the principal dwelling or in a separate structure on the same property. I'm noting here that there is a state definition that was adopted in 2020 of accessory dwelling unit. It's a little bit different from our definition, and we will need to look at that and see if we need to align it with the states or not. So there could be some tweaks that come out of that, particularly related to the size of the unit. Out of the proposed regulations, these are the top 3 administrative priorities. One of the 2 units must be owner-occupied, parking must be provided on-site, and that there be no affordability requirement for either unit. Particularly, I guess I would just explain, this is based on a lot of comments that we received, but also trying to lower the threshold as much as possible. And from our experience and understanding, requiring the unit to be affordably restricted is a high barrier, as our research shows. Only Salem is doing it right now, and it's not really creating a significant additional number of affordable units. So the additional details about accessory, so some of the other criteria. As I said, the unit must be between 500 and 1,500 square feet. The state definition is a little bit different. It says it's either half the floor area of the principal dwelling or 900 square feet, whichever is smaller. Really, if we want, it's a little bit of a nuance. The only reason we would align with the state is if we want to allow a simple majority of city council to pass the ordinance. Otherwise, we can be different. It would just be a supermajority pass. So that's really the only trigger, the thing we have to think about, in addition to whether or not that's an acceptable definition for us. The height shall not be greater than that of a primary structure. Property owner must live on site as a permanent residence, aka owner occupied. Utilities shall be included in the rent cost. 1 on-site parking space is required. 1 ADU only is permitted per parcel. A deed cannot be split between the ADU and principal building. Like, they have to stay in the same ownership for the life of the unit, and that no short-term rentals are permitted. So to get into a little bit more specificity about attached accessory apartments. So those are an accessory dwelling unit located within an owner-occupied single-family dwelling, regardless as if it's existing or modified. An ADU must be no greater than 50% of the primary house's floor area, and multiple front entrances may not be constructed on the building. If there are already multiple entrances, that is fine, but if in a new construction, we would encourage the second entrance to be on the side or rear. Detached accessory apartments, an accessory dwelling unit in a structure on a residential lot that is separate from the principal dwelling and is smaller than the principal dwelling. So these ADUs, detached ADUs, must not be taller than the main house. They shall be clearly secondary to the main house, and the building form and architectural style shall be complementary to the principal building. Additionally, these also need to meet existing setback requirements. So I mentioned the data tool and the kind of potential for parcels that could take advantage of a new ADU ordinance. But looking at market uptake and adoption, we really do not believe that we're going to get anywhere near than 7,644 parcels in the near term or the long term. Particularly, although it is a great option, it is also expensive. Construction costs, if you're building a new unit, could be inhibit somebody from doing this. And you have to want to do it as well. Not everybody wants to be a renter, a landlord. So, what we've looked at in the data that we have analyzed from a 2018 study of mass communities that currently allow ADUs indicated an average of 2.5 ADUs were permitted each year. I would note that most of those required a special permit at the time. So I think that there's a chance that if they were by right, that would lower one of the barriers. Additionally, some of those communities had family requirements, but the communities without family requirements tended to have higher unit creation, so approximately 3 ADUs per year between, this was 2015, 16, and 17. And then as a close by example in Salem, there were 6 ADUs created in the first year following their adoption of an ADU ordinance in 2021. Again, highlighting these are the benefits of accessory dwelling units that we rely on, and that is the extent of my introduction, well, my presentation. Happy to go back to anything because we did lose our PowerPoint for a while. And I think next steps for us after this meeting, we will review and assess the public comment, make revisions to the draft ordinance as necessary, and then our goal is to be able to submit an ordinance amendment to City Council before this summer. So depending on level of comments we get and what people think about the existing ordinance, we might be ready to move really fast. We might need to do a couple tweaks. But that was the original goal. And then the City Council and Planning Board will have a public hearing and vote. And again, for anybody who came in late, you can use the QR codes to provide your comment or the comment cards for the technologically less advanced, but also happy to entertain public comment at the podium. We're gonna try to do a City Council thing, try to keep it to 3 minutes. Ken, my Assistant Planning Director, is gonna time it. And then nobody had to sign up, so I would just ask that you kind of be respectful and line up, and then we'll take it from there. I hear feedback and happy to answer questions to clarify things more.
I have a question.
So if you could just line up and go to the podium, because this is being recorded, so that way everybody at home can hear you too.
I'll just ask a question, or unless somebody else wants to come before me. But so I didn't hear what the full ordinance would be that you were proposing. Like, would there be setback requirements? Like, I know distance from the side to the side and back and front and all that jazz. How would that work?
So as it's written currently, the setback requirements would match the existing setback requirements for a lot in the district that the project is being built in. There is an opportunity and an allowance for going to the ZBA to get relief from that. And I expect we will encounter situations where there are existing non-conforming setbacks. Those would likely have to go to the ZBA as well in order to extend an existing non-conforming situation. But in terms of, the main thing was we don't have a minimum lot size noted, but we do have observance of the existing setbacks.
So, hi, I hope I'm on the same page with you, but I am renting a subsidized place. It's called Jacqueline Tower, but they allow you to make income as high as $77,000. And they were taking 40%, whereas the rest of the, assisted living, it's not assisted living, but rest of these kind of homes were taking 30%. And I just talked to this gentleman, Paul, also, when I saw him in the last meeting about it. And the good news just came with the new governor that starting last month, they have been charging us 30% now, not 40% of our income. So I have is an MRVP voucher where I can move in whole Massachusetts. And they were taking 40% of my income, but now they are taking 30%. And how do I convert that into owning the unit? Or if at all, I'm allowed to, yeah.
I don't know. I mean, that's not what we're talking about tonight.
Yeah.
But I don't know if you'd be able to own your unit in that sense. Yeah, I mean, you live in a multi-unit property.
But, okay, so I just want to show my gratitude how much it helps you in life. I went through a terrible sickness. I'm doing okay now, but during the time when I was signed up for this and the government offer, I'm very thankful for that.
And I didn't say this, and it's fine for you. If you could just give your name and address. 'Cause I forgot about that part.
Yes, Peter Johnson, 677 Hale Street. First of all, thank you for all the work everybody's done on this. I'm certainly in support of, generally in support of providing more housing, and especially if it can be done affordably. I guess I have one question and one comment. I think you answered it, Darlene. The setback remains the same. So if whatever the setback is for that zoning area, you cannot put an accessory, you can't add an additional unit that intrudes into those setback boundaries. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And-
You can seek a variance. So
Okay.
there's still the option to go to the ZBA for a variance.
And
That's
if
same
there is, on an existing property, there is a garage, for instance, that's closer to the boundary, like right on the boundary, can that be converted to an accessory dwelling unit without any legislative, whatever you want to call it, variances or,
My interpretation of that, and I need to run it by the building inspector, but I've had that question, is that that is expansion of it would be an expansion of a non-conforming use, so would require going to ZBA.
okay, thank you. And I would just observe that in a 6,000, in an R6 neighborhood, which I believe is a 6,000 square foot lot, more or less, that's a lot that's 50 feet by 120 feet, 50 feet wide, as an example, 50 feet wide, 120 feet deep. There are a lot of them. That is a small area to try to fit another unit into. And what it and of course, I think it's critical that there is the requirement that there be an additional parking space for that unit. I think that's going to limit lots of things. And that's crucial because in an R6 unit, parking's probably already a problem on the street. But to get, what you wind up with is another unit very close to the next houses, and a very intense relationship on the patios and the backyard activities when you add yet another 2 or 3 people into that space. So personally, I would prefer that the R6 have either more limitations or they not be allowed there. But in larger spaces, I think it's a great idea. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Greg Nowak, 63 Livingstone. Thank you for hosting this. Generally, I'm in support of this, and I just had a question continuing with the setback discussion. If you were to construct a new building that meets the setbacks, but there's an existing building that does not, would there be any penalty for that?
No, you would be able to do that, I believe, by right.
Okay, because
in the by right districts.
for example, I could probably put a new building within setbacks on on the property I have, but I can't move my house, which is right on the sidewalk.
Yeah.
But in exchange, I could probably tear down a garage that's right on the lot line.
Yeah, and you'd be expanding it in a way away from the part that's non-conforming too, right? If you said on the sidewalk, in that particular situation,
Right.
the front setback is the non-conforming piece, and you'd be expanding it to the back of the side, but it would still be conforming. That, I believe, would qualify as a by right expansion.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name's Sherry Guerin. I live at 59 Corning Street. I'm a resident of Beverly and also the homeowner. I'm also a member of First Parish Church, Beverly Unitarian Universalist. Yay, there's lots of us here. And a member of ECHO. And so first, thank you, because a lot of the concerns that I've had are addressed by the program that you have here. My personal main reason for looking for this is also is affordable housing. And so if there's not going to be anything in this process that ensures that these ADUs are affordable or somewhat affordable for what we can do here, I'm concerned that to me, that's the biggest concern, is that this is one small piece of the puzzle of addressing both a lack of available housing, but most importantly, a lack of affordable housing. And if there's not anything in the plan, and even if it hasn't worked successfully other places, is there something else that we can explore? Have we looked to see if there are other cities where they have found a way to make this housing more affordable, these ADU units? I'm just disappointed, because it sounds like it's like, oh, that hasn't worked very well everywhere, so we're just not going to do that. And I would personally like to explore that further, because to me, that's the most important part of this. I mean, we do need places to put bodies, absolutely. There are lots of people that want to live here, and there's not a space for them, but I'm looking for something that's affordable. In my case, I'm 65. I'm now living on a very tight retirement budget and have all kinds of physical things going on. So for me, it would be like, oh gosh, could I offer an affordable unit to someone in exchange for having another person nearby, should I need some extra care, I mean, that would be really of benefit to me and also to a person who needs housing. And I think there are a lot of people that are looking for affordable housing. So that's my one concern.
Sure, I mean, those are the two kind of, I think ADUs by nature are more affordable than a typical rental unit that you're gonna find in a multifamily project downtown, so that's one part of it. They are set, generally by a homeowner who, like you, is looking to provide something at a rate that is, maybe you're not looking to maximize your profit, recoup your expenses, but have an offset. So they do tend to be below what a typical apartment goes for. And then, as you said, they generate rental income for the homeowner as well, so that also helps to offset costs. We've looked into, I said Salem is the only community that we identified in Massachusetts that actually requires it. And it is, there's some very unique situations about it that actually don't seem to be making it that attractive. And some things that wouldn't necessarily apply to Beverly either. But, we are trying to dig into it a little bit more.
Okay. Is there any way, could you recommend where I could find the kind of information that you've been considering in that, like?
We called the Salem assessor.
Okay.
To ask about it in the planning department, in the
Cool.
Salem planning department, yeah.
I'd just like to review it.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Ken, did you find much in your research about the other communities?
None that have a affordability requirement,
Yeah.
some that Salem.
Okay. Thank you.
Hi, sorry to bother you again. John Taylor, I live at 41 Cole Street. So I was wondering, couple of questions. All of our areas in the city are obviously unique. So one of the interesting issues, and I'm wondering how the ordinance would deal with like high water tables. On Cole Street, we've got a high water table. That might be a great area for an ADU type, I don't know what you call it, an ADU type dwelling. But we've got high water tables, so that would make it really, really hard. Just as Mr. Johnston, I think, mentioned that, neighbors are pretty compact, as they are on Cole Street. But the high water table, how would the ordinance deal with that? And then the second question I had for you, or how does it think about that in general as currently written? And then the second question I had was to the lady who was speaking just a moment ago, and I apologize, I forgot your first name. I'm sorry, what? Sherry. So to Sherry's question, what do most people use ADUs for? Is it renting to unrelated parties, or is it renting to their kids? I didn't know. Maybe you've done some research about that.
Well, I'll start with the first question. Zoning by itself does not look at, water table or engineering. We do have engineering standards, but there is nothing in this ordinance that would address specifics to a lot or a site that may be unique to that site. So it's kind of this, it sets the parameters for what you can do, but if you have a high water table, you'll need to have an engineer draw up the plans regardless. You'll need to meet our stormwater management and land disturbance requirements with the engineering department before you build. And you might know, and potentially if you're, in a conservation area, that's also going to, like, within a wetland buffer, that's going to limit the ability to build something as well. So those things will have to be evaluated on a site-by-site basis at the time of application. In Beverly, where I can speak to, they're currently, as far as I know, by law, allowed to be rented or used by children, parents, caretakers, or other kind of family members, as we define in our ordinance a little bit broadly. Are there situations where they might be rented? Maybe. I bet there are. But I don't have that rented to a non-family member. I don't have that information, but I would be foolish to think that there are not situations where there are accessory dwelling units being rented to non-family members. But I think the benefit of changing our ordinance, and the biggest change from our ordinance is that you can now allow anyone to live in it. It doesn't have to be limited to just your family member or your caretaker. You could rent it to a student, a young professional, and then, or vice versa, an empty nester could move into an ADU at another property. So I think that's really the crux of the difference between what we have now and what we're proposing.
Hi, my name's Kate Potter, 163 Dodge Street. I don't see my councilwoman here, but I do want to give a shout out to Kathleen Feldman. She's been a fantastic councilwoman too with the residents of Ward 5. My perspective is one of, I'm a lifelong resident of Beverly. My family's been here for over 50 years. I am also raising my 3 children here, and I'm someone who bought my childhood home, and my mom still lives with me. So my perspective is one where a detached ADU would be something that I would support. I appreciate you putting forward this presentation tonight. And actually, it's something we've been waiting for quite some time. We have been in planning for some sort of ADU, but the differences with attaching an ADU and a detached ADU is there are some pretty stark differences in terms of the cost effectiveness. One being, as far as cost effectiveness, where in an existing home with an attached ADU, we would have to tear down a wall, we would have to take out windows, we would have to take out doors. And with a detached ADU, we have a little bit more flexibility in terms of how that ADU is formed, the square footage, and the like. Also, having 3 kids, I don't really want to take away square footage either. I want to be able to give my mom something that's somewhat separate, her own space where she's not living necessarily in the chaos with 3 kids in the home. Moreover, a home's footprint is what it is. So being able to put a detached ADU somewhere else on the property gives us a lot more options rather than having it attached. So we are a family that we actually have the setbacks. We're looking at that. There are also some great startups that are in the Northeast that are companies and builders that are starting to, there are a lot of them out on the West Coast, and you don't have many options here, but there are a lot of startups for constructing, designing, and building detached ADUs. And so particularly for us, it would be probably a more economical advantage to have a detached ADU rather than an attached ADU to the existing home. So I certainly support it, and I do encourage the council the planning board and the council to adopt such an ordinance to allow for the detached ADUs. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Emily Hutchings. I live at 68 Essex Street. In the course of full disclosure, I should also note that I used to be a planner for the city of Beverly. I'm now a city planner for the city of Somerville. I come at this from both a personal and professional perspective. Professionally, I can say that ADUs are absolutely more affordable, and I still hate speaking in public. And they're naturally more affordable. I would discourage the idea of creating an affordability requirement that makes them a lot more difficult for homeowners to create, even in places as dense as Somerville, for example. It does create some difficulties, but also because they are simply naturally more affordable. On a personal level, I grew up in a home with an ADU at one point. I grew up in a community north of here, very sort of mixed between Centerville and Beverly Farms. And my parents, when I was a teenager, decided to fit out the space above their garage, and they let their youth pastor stay there with his wife and very young child. And that allowed them to stay in a more affluent community where they really didn't have any housing options. They weren't related to us. It also provided a live-in babysitter. But it enabled them to be in the community, to stay there for a lot longer than they otherwise would have. And it was something that my parents really wanted to do on a personal note. They did not want to develop their property to rent out to someone who was random. When the youth pastor and his family moved, they converted it back into my father's office. And I think that's a lot of what people might see in communities such as Beverly. So, thank you.
Hello again. Just wanted to follow up on Sherry's question, and I hope I'm not opening a can of worms, but I generally don't support the affordability requirement either. I understand we have a need for affordable housing, but I think it's a lot to place that burden on individual homeowners. But would it be possible to maybe have some sort of a trade-off, say, some sort of a tax relief if a homeowner were offering an affordable unit? So it was an option where they're not required to have an affordable unit, but if they opt to, there would be some sort of benefit that would offset that lesser amount of income that they'd be collecting.
I have a little bit of information about that from the assessor. So the Salem has a tax exemption. It only applies to the kitchen and the bathroom. So it's very minimal, although it's advertised as the whole unit. They can only apply the tax exemption to the kitchen and the bathroom. I think that's kind of how it would work. So I mean, it is there, but it ends up being like maybe a couple $100 off your tax bill. But
Okay.
it is there.
But could it be done better than Salem?
I think that's the law. So that's
Okay, so
no.
so maybe there are
Not
some
how-
restrictions.
That's not how
but-
assessing works. So,
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Hi, my name is James Mitchell. I lived in Beverly for 12 years. I've been working in Beverly for a long, long time. I'm a local realtor. I'm also a builder and a designer. I fully support this proposal. I think you've done a very thoughtful and straightforward job of making this easy to understand and easy to, not necessarily enforce, but implement. It's a much-needed thing. I'm also, I should say, I'm on the zoning board in Manchester, and we're looking at ADU ordinances as well. And it's a pretty sticky subject there, one that many residents oppose for a lot of the wrong reasons. Most of it is fear-based. I think people are feeling that the town will be overrun with what we considered multifamilies. And what I really liked hearing tonight was that you've really considered parking, you've considered the size, so you're limiting the size and the height. So these are small units. There's also no rental Airbnb, which is also a huge concern. So I think you've done a really excellent job in addressing the concerns that may come up. I would also say that as a realtor professionally, right now, in addition to the affordability crisis we all face, we also have an availability or an inventory crisis. There simply aren't enough homes. There are literally 20 to 30 buyers for every available unit. What we're seeing is people my age, boomers, and older, seniors, are having to stay in place because even if they wanted to sell, and they could sell, and sell at a decent profit, they have nowhere to go. Because a lot of the smaller units they're competing for are also the same competition that people, first-time home buyers, are looking for. So we have this kind of log jam of older folks not being able to move, younger people having no choices, and that's also in addition to the workforce housing you've mentioned, the local, workers, retail workers, nurses, teachers, police and firemen. So this is a hugely beneficial thing. I also think it's important to stress that even though there are maybe 7,500 parcels, it's highly unlikely that even a fraction of those will be converted. So this is a great start, and again, I fully support it, and I hope this moves forward. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Don Preston. I'm a resident of Beverly, 3 Pickett Street. I've been involved in affordable housing for about 23 years right now. I'm also have been active with ECHO and fully support the effort you've made here and the innovative ideas that are showing up. But I am an advocate for a deed restriction on these units so that they remain affordable and that we set guidelines for those. Part of a deed restriction would be that it makes it affordable, an affordable housing unit for as long as it exists. This would restrict the rent to a below market rate amount. Income levels are typically guided by HUD, and right now the median income level by HUD for the city of Beverly is $140,000 plus. But if you go to census figures, the median income for Beverly is $89,000. So when you start looking at taking 60%, 80% of the HUD figure, it's much higher than 60 or 80% of the true median income in Beverly. For instance, I'm recommending that we would restrict these to 30 to 60% of the HUD figures. And that would be at 30% for a single person, it would be like $29,400 for a single person, and for two people, it'd be like $33,600. And that would translate into a rent of between $788 to $946 for a two-bedroom. If we look at the Beverly figures of $89,000 for a family of four, which is typically how it's done, or $50,000 for a figure of a single person, there's a dramatic difference. This is the reason I am recommending a 30 to 60% income restriction on affordable, for affordable ADU units. And to offset that difference, it could be done through tax breaks. It could be what Salem is doing. It could be something more dramatic than that. Creating affordable units will give housing to those who want to live in Beverly, work in Beverly, but cannot afford to. It would help seniors stay in their homes, our children to grow up and enjoy the city they were educated in. Thank you.
Hi, Lorinda Visnick, 39 Middlebury. Thanks for putting this on. This has been very informative. I, in general, am incredibly supportive of ADUs. I am torn about the affordability piece of it because I understand the barriers that you presented, and that if there's an affordability piece, people might be less likely to then dive in and build one. However, we just know how short we are on affordable housing everywhere. So I'm a little torn about that particular piece of it. I'm very much in support of the restriction around no short-term rentals. And I wonder if you could speak some to that, in particular, upon whom is the burden of enforcement going to fall? I think that's an important thing to talk about, as people, some people don't want more housing to be built, and the general reasons why are because we're not adding more police, we're not adding more infrastructure, for instance. So I think those are concerns that also need to be addressed. But in particular, when you say we're going to have a restriction, there needs to be a discussion of how would such a restriction be enforced and upon whom those responsibilities would fall.
Thank you for that comment. I think now is a good time to introduce, and I welcome the mayor, just attended, came in, but in addition to this, although short-term rentals are prohibited in the ADUs, we are expecting to also, at the same time as submitting this ordinance, submit a prohibition of short-term rentals entirely within the community, defining them as 28 days, less than 28 days. Short-term rentals, although beneficial to certain property owners, actually are a detriment to the availability of affordable housing in our community, and create more problems generally, and enforcement being one of them. And so it's a fair question, and I think enforcement is particularly why the affordability piece is concerning, but also, limiting, when we're putting something together, I think I've said this before and other times, my goal in writing zoning is to make it clear and understandable and easy to interpret for the layperson, and minimize as many barriers as possible in terms of achieving what is allowed in our zoning ordinance, and which is essentially what we want to see happen. And so minimizing those things that require extra steps, enforcement, annual checks, things like that, kind of giving the permission to do what we say is okay to do, and then letting it run its course. So that's kind of how I think about this stuff, and enforcement is always a challenge, and usually it falls to the building inspector and his office, and so, or their office generally. But I think they would be the, as far as I know, the person enforcing things like short-term rentals, and the zoning ordinance. Typically, housing restrictions fall to my department for enforcement. So. Does that answer your question?
How about infrastructure?
Well, infrastructure falls to the Department of Public Services for ensuring that it's adequate, or
I think that in order to address concerns, I'm fully in support of this. However, I believe there are a decent number of people who are anti-additional building across the city of Beverly, regardless of what kind of building it is. And I believe that the major reason why people state they're against additional building, regardless of whether it's affordable or not, is they worry whether our city can, quote unquote, support additional building. How many more units can be built before we would trip over some threshold, explicitly stated or otherwise, around adding police, adding fire, increasing potentially the capacity of our water and sewerage, etc. So I'm wondering whether you can speak to that relative to this idea that we're, going to consider the ADUs.
Sure. So yes, so I said one of the benefits, though my projector keeps going away, of ADUs is that they exist in areas where they're already adequately served and appropriately served by public services, including roadways, utilities, water, sewer, and the incremental addition of accessory dwelling units is, although we want it to be a panacea, right, it's going to be slow and small, and that increment is going to have a minimal, negligible effect, in my opinion, on the provision of public services. It's one drop in a bucket of a lot of other things, I recognize, but this piece of it, the impact on public services, I think, is negligible.
And you make that judgment because of the number, the sheer number of what we see in surrounding neighborhoods?
Yes, because of the anticipated number of units that will be that we expect to be built is low enough that it's not, and it's going to be, they're not all going to happen in one neighborhood. I mean, I'm fairly certain of that. And even if they did, that neighborhood can likely absorb it. They're small. They already have the water, they have the sewer, they have the roadways, and the number of them is not going to be in the hundreds. So I just don't see it having a significant impact on that. And we'll evaluate it, certainly, on an annual basis. And if we see anything of concern, that's the time when we'll say, all right, what's going on? We need to figure this out and make sure that, and I think annually we calibrate, certainly with police and fire, how they calibrate how many people they need and how to support the community. So we'll keep looking at that, though.
Hi, my name is Charlie Mann. I live at 21 Riverview Street, Beverly. So I've heard a couple of things here. One thing that, sort of on another layer, one thing that I really like, I am in support, And one thing that I really like is that for a community to be healthy, you want to have young people and older people. And like I serve on a couple of boards and committees, and they tend to be populated by older people because they have the time and the resources. So you want to keep those people in the community. And the younger people, you want them in the community because they're, who are filling the jobs and, becoming passionate about Beverly and growing the community. Plus also it's healthier just to have that sort of intergenerational mix. So, for that reason, I think that they're great. The other thing is, we're building a lot of housing, but not everybody wants to live in a 30-unit building. A lot of people want to be in a little less dense setting, and they provide that. And, again, from the construction standpoint, it makes a ton of sense not to be building, cutting down trees and building new buildings. And by utilizing what we have, it just makes so much more sense. So I'm very much in favor. And then on the affordable part, you can't, I've actually been involved in building some affordable housing, and it's very difficult to fund. It takes a lot of contributors to make it happen, and you'd never be able to do it depending on one, individual to fund it, because it wouldn't make any sense to build a unit. Nobody would build it if it made no financial sense. So you'd either have to support it or not enforce it. So my comments.
Good evening. Leonard Richardson, Odell Avenue. Been here 33 years. I really, really like my neighbors a lot. That's a good group. I'd like to stay. So I think a couple of things that I'd like to comment. One is, I think aging in place would be a real benefit for my wife and me, and having the ability to have our daughter come back from renting a rent that she can't really afford and come back and live on the property with her family would be a real advantage. So those kinds of things are great. Many years ago, people were against converting railroad beds for bike paths because it would bring crime and all this stuff. And it turned out to be really good. It brought the neighborhoods up. It allowed people to enjoy themselves outdoors. So some things are hard to wrap your mind around, but I can't see that many people, not thousands of people, aren't going to start building on their property in Beverly. But I think the affordability, one comment I have about affordability, the gentleman was talking about the percentages, the HUD, and the average income or mean income of somebody in Beverly. I mean, if you just sort of sit down and look at the numbers, if you build a unit, it's going to cost, and you're not a builder, it's going to cost you roughly 225 square foot. And if you have something that two people can live in, then you have to redo a mortgage. And if you can't even cover your costs for your kid, like let's say you want them to rent it and it's $700 and your mortgage is, $1,100, then it's a losing proposition. So I think there can be some workarounds maybe, or some thought can be given to those kinds of things, because I think affordability I really support that. But in not all situations would it be completely practical for the homeowner. So that's it. Thank you.
It's me again. Maybe it would be really interesting to know, instead of generalities, just like specifically how many units are you projecting of these ADUs would get built, say in the first year, just extrapolating from the data that you have. in other communities. What would be your guesstimate of how many we'd see in Beverly were the city council to go forward with your proposed resolution?
I'm still trying to collect a little bit more data on that, more recent than the 2018 data that I have now. We've been trying to understand that a little bit better. Today, I would roll at like 5, something like that in the first year. So 2 to 5, something like that.
Katie Perrin, 32 Ashton Street. I guess I have a couple concerns about this. If anyone has been to Ashton Street lately, they pretty much put giant houses on 4,000 square foot lots. So it's already a very dense neighborhood, and not having a minimum lot size, I think, is not fair to the neighbors. I could see, I have a long lot, I could easily throw another house behind my house because it's a long space. My neighbor could do that, and then I'd have a giant house that's bigger than my house. I have a 1,200 square foot house that's bigger than my house in my neighbor's backyard. Because again, height restrictions wouldn't matter, we're on a hill. And there's already so many houses just within 100 yards of my house that have already been built on these very small lots, or giant houses on appropriately sized lots. So I think there should be a lot size minimum. I do think the 1,500 square feet is too large. Again, I have myself and 5 children in a 1,200 square foot house. I think if we're talking about the purpose of this, it's the affordability. A 1,500 square foot house is not going to be affordable to anybody. It's huge. The people who need these homes are needing a space like 1,200 square feet or smaller. And again, I don't want someone building a second house behind my house that's bigger than my own house. That's supposed to be an accessory unit. And then for myself, I think the minimum is kind of funky because then I could only build a 600 square foot detached. So how is that fair to me? Because my house is so small to begin with, but it might be cheaper for me, let's say, to build a second house, but it can only be 600 square feet. So I think the sizes aren't fair. I think there should be a lot size minimum, and I think the Zoning Board of Appeals should not be allowed to waive a lot size minimum for a detached accessory dwelling unit. And I do think there should, a way to get around it would be maybe instead of getting rid of that requirement for families to be a family, a parent, a sibling, is that maybe either the homeowner or the renter should be over a certain age. I think the niche market that people are looking for is people who want to either come live with their children or whatnot, but that might be a way to kind of work that too, is to say that the stipulation is that either the single family homeowner or the renter must be over age 50 or something. And then you wouldn't have to worry about so much of the affordability because you're actually doing it for the people who need it.
You have to be last.
What's that? Don't, Bartley.
I don't want to go after you. Sarah Bartley, 10 Kittredge Street. The only thing I could think to say that hasn't been said is I just feel really fortunate to live in this community. I think Beverly is just a really incredible place to live. I think it's really awesome. And when we were first deciding where to live, I was an AmeriCorps member who made like $11,000 a year, something crazy like that. And we found an apartment that we could afford and just felt so fortunate. We lived in Beverly Farms and loved it and enjoyed having 6 units in an apartment building. We got to know our neighbors who were quirky and weird and awesome, and actually kind of miss having more people around. We like our neighborhood now. Anyway, just wanted to add, if creating housing creates opportunities for people to live here, I think that's awesome because I want people to be able to live here, particularly younger people, older people who might have difficulty finding place in the community. I think it's really awesome and it benefited me, so wouldn't want to deny that to anyone else. That's it.
See how good she was? Well, all I heard out of that was that Beverly Farms is quirky and weird, so I assume that's Matt and the Johnsons and anybody else who'd like to raise their hand. So Andrew DeFranza, 11 Weber Avenue, Goat Hill in Ward 2, which, as everybody knows, is the best ward in the city of Beverly. Delighted to see you all.
Happy to fight afterwards outside, always, about anything, so feel free. Very excited. Echo Sarah's comments. I always feel so fortunate to be here and to live here, for my kids to go to school here. And I'm thrilled to see this coming to fruition. It's been a long time coming. It was in the housing plan as a possibility, so we're very excited about it. Great to have it available. We have so many housing needs. As Don Preston, who is a legend, as you can tell by his vest, is a legend in the housing community, will tell you. And to quote Matt Damon in Good Will Hunting, we need sort of any port in the storm. If you don't know that line, we could talk about that later. We need a lot of the housing. So a couple of things quickly that we would support for myself as Andrew, and then Harbor Light Homes, for those of you who know us, and folks that are here. So we definitely are in support of not having the short-term rental, as people have mentioned. I think that's a great move to remove that. Very supportive of the dimensions. So using the existing physical dimensions of existing space or setbacks is a brilliant way to manage volume and parameters. People can feel like what could be here can be here, and that's what's possible. Very excited about that. Also support the detached option, which was mentioned earlier. Great idea, and very supportive of that. I think, as was mentioned, we have one of our major problems is that we have people that are way over house that are looking for options. So we have the square footage, we have the physical massing in many buildings, and this will give us an opportunity to make better use of that, to provide income both sometimes for the elderly homeowners, as well as to allow them places to go. And so we're delighted about that. We are concerned, as Lorinda mentioned earlier, about the affordability requirement. I understand the math and the square footage costs, and there is some reality to that. I think that probably bears some more discussion, but we generally would want, of course, more affordability than less. There are some challenges there, and maybe table that for a discussion another day. The one issue that I am concerned about is the parking. Particularly for some of the smaller units. I think that will, if of anything in this, the requirement for a single parking space, I think will be a major challenge, especially in some of the neighborhoods that might otherwise have physical space and proximity to a train or one of the bus stops, and then that may be a challenge, especially and maybe a way to manage it is the square footage size. For the smaller units where you have an elderly person, or you have a younger single person. I think that's going to be a challenge for us, but all in all, wonderful, very excited, and look forward and hopeful that this will get passed in a form that's effective and creates some more housing opportunities for all kinds of people in the city, which we desperately need. So thank you very much to Ms. Nguyen and everybody in the department. Welcome to your new staff person and your former staff person, and delighted to see everybody tonight. Thank you very much.
Is that it? All right. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for being here and for providing your comments. If you didn't feel comfortable speaking in public, or if something else comes up, feel free to shoot me an email. Scan the QR code on your way out, say yes or no, we'll keep track. And stay tuned. I guess if you do want to find out more information, make sure I have your email address. There's a sign-in sheet in case we have another meeting. But we'll certainly send an email if the public hearing is scheduled as well, so that you can also know about it and attend. And otherwise, keep your eyes peeled on the city website. So thank you all. Thank you.